With comic books, it's important that the characters can relate to the people reading them. When it's applied to DC or Marvel, things can get a bit complicated because these companies and these characters have been around for decades. How do you keep characters who have been around longer than those people who read them fresh and interesting? You ignore some basic rules of age and existing continuity in some situations. When it comes to DC, we have characters that have been around for a very, very long time. If you want to hear comic book character narrations, then be sure to check the Shadow Parliament's channel for various characters' origins. Most of these characters, if we think about it, are very old and possibly outdated. One of the reasons why the original Crisis on Infinite Earths was done was to clean up the decades worth of continuity that the DC characters had. In current comics, some events as to what characters may have done are not referred to but can be considered official, like Superman and Batman fighting in World War II. But if this is true, then these characters must be in their 80s or older. Why would they look so young in comics today then? In Marvel, the situation is similar. We have most characters born in continuity decades ago, but visually they look like in their 20s or 30s. This needs to happen, logically. We can't have an old Wolverine or Captain America. Wait, they are old, but they look young because of their continuity history. But you know what I mean. In Marvel, there is no longer any continuity aspect. Everything is constantly being redone because everything has already been done. I've heard one account that Spider-Man should technically be in his mid-40s to early 50s by this point, but physically, he's in his mid-20s or early 30s. What's done now with characters by current writers may not reflect how a character was represented in previous years. To a point, writers now don't know how to use these characters, and added to that, do people really read comics anymore? But that's another discussion. If someone can give a reason as to why the publishers won't age specific characters in a comment, that would be very welcome. I'm being vague in my description on purpose, but if people want an example, I'll give one. Look at this. It pretty much sums up my argument of no comic continuity in Marvel at this point, which is a pretty good example. Dates are not referred to in the Marvel Universe anymore, of what happens in current stories as well as previous classic stories. Like for example, when were the Avengers first formed? The 1960s? I can imagine current writers having them being assembled, yes, but the year is not the original one. It might be more recent to fit into more realistic years, or not even mentioned at all. According to this example, the last clearly marked event was the death of Jean Grey, Phoenix, which was an Uncanny X-Men. I think that this is a very good example, because if I remember reading comics past that point, the years which were referenced in stories did become a little bit hazy. So think about this. There's a lot of criticism with Marvel now. I think more so than DC. Let's give a good example. The marriage of Mary Jane Watson and Peter Parker. I don't even have to mention it. If you heard of what happened, you would be explaining, not me. We all know of the relationship between Peter and Mary Jane. The classic, iconic relationship that existed in the comics for all those years. And then, all of a sudden, the breakup. Which was not really good either. Not only that, but I believe the knowledge of the marriage was erased from continuity, which means no one knew that it even happened. What's the use of it? They are just going to get back together and possibly be married again at some point in the future. Why? Because, like I said, this is one of the iconic comic book relationships. Others are Clark Kent and Lois Lane, Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle, Reed Richards and Susan Storm, Scott Summers and Jean Grey. These are the iconic comic book relationships that readers will always hear about and feel strongly for. They can and should always exist. No writer should ever break them up. Marvel's not at complete fault here. DC has some blame to take too. But I can understand why these publishers would do these sorts of things now. Because, like I said, it can be argued that no one reads comics anymore. But that's another discussion.